Hey everyone, ready for a wild one. Today we are diving deep into the story of Belle Gibson, the wellness influencer
Yeah.
who became super famous
Right.
by saying she cured her terminal cancer with like diet and alternative therapies.
hmm
The thing is, it was all like completely made up.
It's really fascinating, actually. It shows this trend we're seeing. More and more people, they are trusting influencers over, actual doctors.
Especially in the wellness world
Right,
today.
exactly.
Yeah.
And it gets even crazier because we've got like articles here from the Economic Times, Cosmopolitan UK, and Time magazine. They all look at this whole thing from different angles.
So before we even get into like her becoming famous and all that, it's important to know that she had a history of, well, embellishing medical stories.
But
Yeah. Time magazine talks about how even before the cancer stuff, she would tell these elaborate stories
yeah.
about like heart surgeries and near-death experiences, almost like, practice for the bigger lie. Wow. Yeah. That is, it's almost like those early stories where her like warm-up act,
Right.
before the main event. It really makes you think about like the psychology behind it all.
Absolutely. Psychologists might say it points to a deeper pattern, maybe needing attention or wanting to control how people saw her. But let's look at how she created this whole persona.
Okay, so imagine early 2010s, Instagram's blowing up. Belle Gibson, she enters the scene as Healing Belle.
Catchy.
Right, all this gorgeous content, organic meals, yoga, that whole vibe. But the real thing that grabbed everyone was her saying she had terminal brain cancer and was healing herself naturally.
And the Economic Times, they point out how powerful that was. People were drawn to the hope, especially those dealing with their own health issues. But that's the danger, right? When misinformation gets mixed in with real vulnerability.
It gets tricky, yeah. Because she wasn't just sharing recipes or like lifestyle tips. She was actually advising people on alternative treatments,
Mm.
even suggesting they could, replace real medicine.
Which raises a big question. What was it about those alternative therapies that made people trust, like an influencer, over, their doctors?
Well, Time suggests she was offering something that traditional medicine often can't: hope and control.
Yeah.
When you're facing something serious, the idea that you can take charge, find a natural cure, it's very appealing.
That's a good point. It's not always that people distrust, traditional medicine, but they might be looking for something more, a sense of empowerment, a holistic approach, which is what she seemed to offer.
Right, and then it went beyond just Instagram. She made the whole pantry this app all about healthy living. And get this, it was the top app in the Apple Store within like a month.
The Economic Times mentions that success got her a cookbook deal, too.
Yeah.
Really cemented her status in the wellness world. She was on top, at least for a bit.
Until, well, things started to unravel, people noticed inconsistencies.
Exactly. Her lifestyle didn't really scream terminally ill, and some of her medical claims, well, they just didn't add up.
And that's where these investigative journalists, Bo Donnelly and Nick Toscano, come in. They got a tip from her friend, Chanel, who had her doubts.
What's fascinating is that Donnelly and Toscano, in their book, The Woman Who Fooled the World, they say they actually started by looking into her charity claims.
Oh, right.
She said she'd donate profits, which turned out to be totally made up.
Wow. So not only was she lying about her illness, but she was like taking advantage of people's good intentions.
It was a whole web of lies. And from there, they really dug deep and uncovered the truth about her cancer diagnosis being completely fake. And the fallout was pretty quick.
Yeah, Apple took down her app, the cookbook deal fell apart, and she was actually convicted in Australia for, misleading consumers.
It's almost like a Shakespearean tragedy, this quick rise and fall. But the story keeps going. Netflix even made a series called Apple Cider Vinegar. They use fictional characters based on real people in this whole wellness scene.
Like Milla Blake, who's based on Jess Ainscough, another influencer who is big on alternative cancer treatments. Sadly, though, she died from cancer in 2015.
Right, and then there's Clive Rothwell, based on Gibson's actual partner, and Chanel, the friend who bravely, exposed everything. It's a complicated mix of people and their reasons for doing what they did.
It is, but I think it's important to remember this goes way beyond just Belle Gibson. Her story really shows how these alternative therapies can be so alluring, and how misinformation, especially about health, can be really dangerous.
For sure. And it leaves us with this question, why would someone make up such a big lie, knowing it could really hurt people? Was it fame? Money? Some weird need to be in control? We may never know for sure.
It really makes you wonder. What were your first thoughts when you heard about all this?
I it really yeah, it does. And what's I find interesting is how Apple Cider Vinegar, the Netflix show, uses those meetup characters
Yeah.
to, explore different sides of it all. Like Mila Blake, she's like the true believer, the one who really thinks alternative therapies work.
Oh, yeah. And in this show, they even make her skeptical of Belle. It's like they're showing that, not everyone in that whole wellness world was like totally buying into what Belle was saying.
Right, exactly. It's more nuanced. It doesn't say everyone in wellness is bad or anything, because there are a lot of good people who really want to help.
For sure. And then there's Lucy. She's like the vulnerable patient, desperate for a cure, willing to try anything.
Her story, it's really powerful. It shows how these alternative therapies, they can be so emotionally appealing. When you're facing a serious illness, the idea of a natural cure, it's very tempting.
Yeah, you can easily see how someone in that situation would like gravitate towards someone like Belle Gibson. She was like the poster child for, beating the odds.
Exactly. And we should acknowledge that wanting to control your own health, it's a totally normal human thing. The problem comes when someone like Belle takes advantage of that.
That's a good point. It seems like that need for control is a big part of why some people turn to, alternative therapies, even when there's not a lot of science to back them up.
Yeah, you're right. Traditional medicine, with all the clinical trials and statistics, it can feel impersonal or even like you're not in charge. Alternative therapies, on the other hand, they often focus on like your individual experience, a more holistic view, and that can be very attractive to people.
But as we saw with Belle Gibson, that appeal can be really dangerous when it's, based on lies.
Absolutely. And it brings us to something we can't ignore, the dangers of misinformation and like the whole wellness industry. It's something we really need to think about carefully.
Yeah, for sure. While a lot of alternative therapies can be good, as something extra alongside regular treatment, they should never be seen as replacements for, real medicine, especially with serious illnesses like cancer.
Right. And the problem is the wellness industry, a lot of it isn't regulated. So it becomes like a breeding ground for misinformation, even scams. It's hard to know what's actually safe and what works.
That's almost like the Wild West,
Yeah.
for healthcare. So much information, but like, who can you trust?
That's a great way to put it. And it shows why we need more awareness. People need to think critically.
So where do we go from here? How do we navigate this whole mess of information and misinformation, especially when it comes to our health?
Well, I think the most important thing is to be smart about the information we consume. We need to question things, look for real research, and talk to, qualified healthcare professionals before making any big decisions about our health.
I've heard that do your own research thing a lot, but there's just so much out there, it's hard to know where to even start. How can people actually research health information effectively?
That's a good point. Just like Googling something can lead you to a ton of conflicting information. What's really important is to look at reputable sources. So, government health websites like the National Institutes of Health, big medical organizations like the Mayo Clinic, or those peer-reviewed scientific journals.
So it's about being picky with who we trust. What of those labels you see everywhere, like natural or holistic? Do those actually mean something is safe or, actually works?
No, not necessarily. Natural doesn't automatically mean harmless. And holistic, sometimes it's just a marketing word without like any real meaning behind it. We have to remember even natural things can be powerful. They can interact with medication. So it's always best to talk to a doctor or healthcare professional.
Makes sense. Going back to Belle Gibson, it's like a warning, isn't it, about blindly trusting information,
Yeah.
especially when it comes from sources that, haven't been checked out.
Exactly. And it shows how important it is to be like critical thinkers, especially now when misinformation spreads online so quickly.
It's like the responsibility shifts from the expert to like the individual.
Yeah.
You can't just accept everything you see or hear, even if it sounds good or the person seems trustworthy.
You got it. We have to go from just passively taking things in to like actively engaging with the information. We have to be willing to ask questions, dig deeper, look at evidence, and consult those reliable sources.
So in a way, Bill Gibson's story, even though it's, sad and disturbing, it can also be a wake-up call. It reminds us that we all have to do our part in, fighting misinformation, especially when it comes to our health.
Absolutely. And it circles back to that question. Why would someone go to such lengths to make up such a, harmful lie? What was she really after?
Yeah, that's the big question. Was it fame, money, some weird need for control? It keeps you guessing.
It does. And maybe there isn't one, like, clear answer. People are complicated.
But even without a clear answer, her story is a powerful reminder to be skeptical, think critically, and make informed choices.
Couldn't agree more. It reminds us that we all have a responsibility to be careful about the information we consume and to protect ourselves and each other from the dangers of misinformation.
We've talked about a lot today, from Belle Gibson's rise and fall to, all the problems with misinformation in the wellness world. But there's one last piece we haven't really looked at.
You're right. We've talked about the problem, what it leads to, and the need to think critically. But what about solutions? How do we, move forward in a world that seems like it's full of both truth and lies? That's what we'll look at next.
It's like we opened this whole can of worms, all right?
Yeah.
We talked about how appealing alternative therapies can be and the danger of misinformation and how someone like Bill Gibson could, take advantage of that. But what can we actually do? How do we protect ourselves and others?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is.
And it's not easy to answer. But a good place to start is education. We have to give people the tools to really think about the information they're getting, how to find good sources, how to deal with all this stuff online.
So empowering people to be smarter about the information they come across. That makes sense. But how do we do that? Where do we begin?
One way is to teach media literacy. Start young in schools.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Teach kids how to analyze sources, spot bias, understand how advertising and online content, how it tries to persuade them. That can really help build a more informed, generation.
Yeah, it's like giving them a toolkit for navigating this sea of information. What about adults, though, who, didn't learn those skills in school?
There are things for adults, too. A lot of libraries and community centers, they have workshops on media literacy and critical thinking. And online, there are resources like the News Literacy Project and the Center for Media Literacy. They offer some great guidance and tools.
And those fact-checking websites, too, like Snopes and PolitiFact, they seem so important, helping to debunk those false claims and giving, real analysis.
Absolutely. Those fact-checking sites are essential in the fight against misinformation. They can really help separate truth from, fiction, help us make better decisions.
It sounds like it takes everyone working together. It's not just on each of us individually, right? It's about creating a society where everyone is more informed, more discerning.
Exactly. And that brings us to the role of social media. Those platforms, they have a responsibility, don't they, to stop the spread of harmful stuff, to promote things that are actually credible.
I've seen some platforms starting to flag stuff that might be misleading, which is, a start. But it also raises concerns about censorship, right? Like who decides what's true?
That's a huge issue. How do you balance, stopping misinformation with protecting free speech and open discussion? It's a tough question with no easy answers.
It is. This all makes me think about something else. Why are people drawn to misinformation in the first place?
Yeah.
It seems like there's often this emotional need, People want hope, easy answers.
You're right. Misinformation, it often plays on those feelings, our fears, anxieties, our desires. It offers simple solutions to things that are really complicated, which is really tempting when things feel uncertain, right? That's why it's so important to deal with those deeper, emotional and psychological things that make people vulnerable to those stories.
So it's not enough to just give facts and, debunk the myths. We have to understand why misinformation works, why people fall for it.
Exactly. And it's about building resilience, and fostering those critical thinking skills so people can approach information with more confidence and be better at, figuring out what's true.
So as we finish up our deep dive into this, fascinating but kind of disturbing story, I'm feeling cautious but also hopeful. Cautious because, misinformation is a real threat, but hopeful because we have the tools and knowledge to fight it.
I agree. Belle Gibson's story, it's a powerful reminder to think critically, make informed decisions, and work together to create a world where information is more truthful and trustworthy.
It's been really insightful. We've explored the wellness industry, how appealing but dangerous alternative therapies can be, and the big problem of misinformation in, this digital age we live in.
And we've left you with some things to think about. How can we be smarter about the information we consume? What can social media platforms do? And how do we address those emotional needs that make people vulnerable to these false narratives?
Those are some big questions, and they really need our attention. We hope you'll keep exploring this topic, challenge your own assumptions, and be a part of the conversation about truth, misinformation, and, what information will look like in the future. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.